thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming tonight, guys. Welcome to our presentation. Our presentation is Immigration Armageddon. Is it a disaster or is it an opportunity? Okay, we're going to be joined tonight by Russell Harrison, who is a member of the IEEE staff. He works for IEEE. He actually works for IEEE USA. So just in case you aren't familiar with the way that IEEE is organized, so IEEE, the mothership, is the global professional organization for electrical and electronics engineers. Okay. Now it's also divided up into country-by-country segments. Okay. Actually, it's really regions, and some of the regions include multi-countries. It's a system designed by engineers for engineers. Okay. So of course it's complicated, but most importantly, one of the largest regions is of course North America. Okay, now North America is served by a portion of IEEE, which is called IEEE USA. And IEEE USA only really cares about issues that relate to engineers who are working in the United States. So they worry about, I think one of their biggest accomplishments historically was they had a big role in 401ks. Yes. So, pension, it used to be pension, but they did a lot of stuff on Capitol Hill and all the stuff that got passed. So you and I now have 401ks that move from company to company and company and stuff like that. So that was a big success back in the day. Well, they're still there. IEEE USA is still actively involved in a lot of very important legislative issues. They don't worry about things like gun control or abortion or stuff like that because it really has nothing specifically to do with engineers. They concern themselves a lot with technology, and they spend a ton of time working with our senators and representatives teaching them about science, right? These guys are making very, very important decisions about wind power and nuclear power plants, and they, what kind of degrees do these guys have, right? I mean, a lot of them are lawyers, granted, okay, not a lot of science in that. A bunch of them are business majors, okay, some of them are doctors, fantastic careers, but they don't know anything about the topics that they're being asked to vote on, right? So IEEE USA does a lot of stuff like that. Well, how does the IEEE USA do that? Well, they hire people like Russell, who are bright, smart people who can be educated on a wide range of engineering topics. This is how IEEE feels about it. And Russell's skill set is that he is able to move throughout Capitol Hill. He knows how to talk to senators and representatives. He understands what drives them. He understands that every 6 years, senators sometimes get a little bit of turnover, and every 4 years, every 2 years, the representatives have to run for office, and they've got different issues and stuff like that. And ultimately, if we want our engineering issues to become bills, come on, you remember, I'm a bill on Capitol. Okay, you know where I go. All right. Turn into bills and turn into laws and get voted and stuff like that. It's a matter of educating everybody. And then, of course, the flip side is not just educating our elected officials, but educating us, right? We're the ones who are voting, and we also have to send letters that say, hey, I support House Bill 3012 or whatever, and all that sort of stuff like that. Okay, so that's what he does for a living. Now, one of the huge issues that's right out there right now has to do with immigration. And I will be completely honest with you, I'm aware that it's an issue, but I'm not 100% what's going on. Microsoft is laying off 12,000 employees, but they're going to replace them with people from Bangladesh, or I don't know. So, but Russell's here tonight. Yep. He's going to make it all clear for us. So thank you very much, and welcome.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Just to build on something you just said. Senators have to run every 6 years. Representatives have to run every 2 years. Over the last 10 years, more European monarchs have lost their job than members of Congress, which is a bit disturbing, I think. Anyway, my name is Russ Harrison. I'm the Director of Government Relations at IEEE USA, which means not only am I your lobbyist, I'm one of your lobbyists, I'm your top lobbyist in Washington, D.C. As said, I represent all IEEE members in regions 1 through 6, which is the United States, plus Jamaica, because engineers thought that should be part of the United States. I don't know why, but it is. But anyway, everybody 1 through 6. In Washington, we represent you before the media, Congress, state legislatures in some cases, local governments in some cases, and more broadly, the American public. And so we are your eyes, your ears, and your voice to those groups. And what I want to talk about tonight is, kind of some of the things that we've been working on, particularly focusing on immigration policy because that tends to get everybody worked up and it doesn't make something more entertaining. But before I start, a couple of things. First of all, as I mentioned, I have some stuff down here. It's really heavy, and I'm only going to carry on luggage, so please take it with you when you leave, because I don't want to bring it back. Secondly, I am your employee. I'm an IEEE employee. I'm a professional lobbyist. I'm a registered lobbyist, but I don't have clients. I just work for IEEE, which means you guys have given me a job, which I'm very grateful for. So this is your meeting. They're your cookies. Interrupt me. Take the conversation where you want it to go. I have slides and stuff, but we can take the conversation any way you want to go. And that's fine with me. All right. With that, other thing up here I want to mention is, again, building on the introduction, IEEE USA takes positions on policy questions when we have something unique to say and the issue uniquely affects engineers. So, for example, we don't take a position on gun control. Why? Because gun control is not unique to engineers. Engineers don't have a unique perspective on it. So we have nothing to add. So we let the other guys fight for it. We take positions on the structure of the electrical grid. Why? Because you guys have a lot to say about how the electrical grid should be structured. And in fact, you have vastly more to say than almost anybody else in the country about how the electrical grid should be structured. On immigration, we do not have a position on amnesty. We do not have a position on border security, undocumented immigrants, illegal aliens, whatever term you want to use. We don't get into any of that. We worry about high-skill stuff that affects engineers. And so that's how we try to divide things up. We have a very, very broad agenda in Washington, which I'll touch on in a minute. So the other way we decide what to work on is what you guys tell us to work on, and what you guys insist is a priority for you. We'll get to that later. Anyway, quick summary of some of the stuff we're working on. Intellectual property issues. Congress has, over the last 3-4 years, passed some sweeping changes to U.S. patent law, copyright law, trademark law. Changes in the way people get intellectual property protections, changes in ways those protections can be utilized. Most of those changes we think are pretty bad. In most cases, we believe the changes Congress has implemented are great and very, very useful if you have a lot of lawyers on call. And if you don't have a lot of lawyers, you're in trouble. Which means if you're a small inventor, you're an independent inventor, protecting your ideas is getting increasingly difficult. Now, there was a bill in this Congress that passed the House. It was amazing. The bill was introduced in late October and it passed before Thanksgiving last year. Wow. It was like 3 weeks from introduction to passage, a major sweeping patent reform bill. Tells you how closely our legislators are focusing on this issue, which was awful. It was just terrible. And we managed to stop it in the Senate. We convinced enough senators that there was a problem here that they backed off and said, we're going to take some time to look at it. But we're working very hard to represent particularly the concerns of smaller inventors and independent inventors on intellectual property issues. Not surprisingly, we're very active on energy issues. I have a book over there that summarizes our overall position on energy policy. If you grab one, please keep in mind that it was not written for you. It was written for a member of Congress, so it is rather simplistic. I do not want to confuse those guys. If we can help it, that's unfortunate. By the way, I did this presentation to Tulsa last night, basically the same presentation. I was about to make that statement, and then I realized that the guy in the front row had a legislator pin on. Oh. He was actually a state senator that had come, and I can't make fun. Anybody elected here? Or any members of the media? Just okay, perfect. So IEEE is focused on energy policy. Summarized there, we have much more detailed position statements online if you really want to get into the meat of our position. But that's for the public, the media, and Congress. We focus on how this country generates power, how we distribute power, how we use power, and in particular, how those three pieces are all fit together. Legislators across the spectrum are generally very bad at figuring out how a system works. What lawyers are trained to do is they're trained to take something and rip it into little tiny pieces and focus on each one of those pieces, which works in some cases, but when you're trying to build an electrical grid for a nation, that's not necessarily the best way to do it. So we focus on the big picture. We're active on cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is a good example of one of the things that we do, which is we educate legislators. Very, very few people on Capitol Hill understand what cybersecurity means, what exactly the risks are, what exactly you can do about it. And so we've spent a lot of time over the last 2 or 3 years bringing IEEE members who are experts in cybersecurity up to Capitol Hill to talk to legislators and staff about what exactly the problem is. Give you an example. Any of you remember what HIPAA were a few years ago?
Yep.
A bill which was introduced, it was designed to cut down on trafficking of illegal goods over the internet. Counterfeit purses, but also songs and movies and digital content. And so it was supposed to stop that from moving across the internet. It was written by the entertainment industry, and it was going to pass. It passed the House without really debate. The Senate was all on board to pass it. One of the things that bill did is it said that ISPs, internet service providers, had to verify that any of the websites passing through their networks did not contain counterfeit goods. Now, how exactly is one supposed to do that? You're an ISP, there are trillions of bits flying through your servers every second. You're supposed to take the bits, take them out, look at them, and see if there's illegally downloaded movie in there, to see if the website is selling a knockoff Gucci purse. How do you do that? You don't do that. So we educate Congress about how the internet works, how cybersecurity works, what is possible, what isn't possible. Small business is an area we've been getting more active in over the last 6 or 7 years. We have developed a very good relationship with the Small Business Administration. 2008, 2009, we've been hearing from members for a long time that the SBA was useless. SBA couldn't help small technology companies. They didn't give them loans. They didn't give them assistance. They couldn't give them advice. They had no programs for technology companies. And so we went to the SBA and said, this is what we're hearing. And the SBA, to their great credit, said, I know. We've had this problem for years. What do we do about it? Here's the problem. SBA had people on staff that knew how to open a restaurant, and they knew how to found a landscaping company, and they knew how to found, a small doctor's office. They had no idea how to found a software company. And so if somebody came to them and said, look, I have this brilliant idea for a new type of software, and here's my business plan for starting this company. The guys at the SBA that were responsible for reviewing these plans looked at that and said, I got nothing. I don't know what this means. So I can't okay it. And so they didn't. What we've been doing over the last 5 or 6 years is finding particularly, retired IEEE members, people who have founded companies, and putting them with the SBA to both teach the SBA about technology companies and also to serve as reviewers, advisors to small technology companies through the Small Business Administration. And they have been very, very receptive to our efforts to help them. Patent Office, by the way, is doing the same thing. The Patent Office had a really hard time understanding technology patents, particularly software patents. They didn't know what to do with them. They didn't have the expertise. They have aggressively reached out to IEEE members specifically to hire them as patent examiners. And we've had, if you're interested in becoming a patent examiner, let me know. I know something higher. And they are very interested in getting engineers into the Patent Office to review technology patents. Turns out it's easier to teach you how to review a patent than it is to teach you about electronics. Budget's pretty self-explanatory. The federal government spends in the ballpark of $200 billion a year in stuff we care about. K through 12 education, university support, basic research, the national labs, NASA, DARPA, all those things. And every year we got to go make sure we get it again. Budgets have been tight the last few years. I can tell you that our budgets have held up very well, better than almost any other part of the budget. But you got to fight every year, and every year it's a fight. Lastly, an area we're getting into is standards. IEEE, for those of you who don't know, IEEE is one of the world's largest standard-setting organizations, if not the largest standard-setting organization. We do almost all of the technology standards in the world, and a lot of those standards have policy implications. And we're working with the government to both help them understand the value of IEEE standards, but also help them get standards right, because they're perfectly capable of not doing that. So just a quick overview. There's lots of other things that we work on as well. But that's just a quick summary of everything except immigration, which we'll get in a second. That was very quick. Any questions about any of that? Okay. Fair enough. Okay. Before we talk about immigration policy, and again, we're talking high-skill immigration. Well, how does the United States let people into this country based on their education or skills? Not amnesty, not people walking across the border, that's a whole different issue. We're looking at high skill. There are 3 visas that we're talking about. A visa, for those of you who don't know, is a little piece of paper that says you get to stand in the United States. There are lots and lots and lots of types of visas. We're worried about 3 of them. They are the H-1B and the L visa, which are basically the same thing. There's a subtle difference, but we're going to treat them as though they're the same thing for purposes of tonight. H-1Bs and L visas are temporary work permits. They allow a company to hire someone from outside the country for a limited amount of time. That person is then permitted to stand in the United States and work for a limited amount of time, after which something has to happen. They either have to go home or get a different type of visa. The other type of visa we're talking about is an EB visa. That stands for employment-based visa. EB visas are green cards. A green card makes an individual a permanent legal resident of the United States. When you are a permanent legal resident of the United States, you have the legal right to stand in the United States as long as you wish, in any way you wish, and to basically behave as if you were an American citizen, except you can't vote and do a couple other things. You can be on a green card your entire life, but you are allowed, after 5 years, to petition for full citizenship. Most of the people that we're talking about, when they petition for citizenship, they will get it. Most of them got their degrees here, so they speak English. Most of them will be able to pass the test because it's not that difficult, particularly if you have an engineering degree. And most of them are able to not commit a felony, which is basically what for years. Yes?
Taxes. If I have an H-1B visa, do I pay U.S. taxes?
You do. You do pay taxes. You pay full taxes, including Social Security, even though you are not entitled to receive it.
And same thing, obviously, with EB, I assume, right?
Yeah, EB green card holders are treated legally exactly like American citizens, except you can't vote. You can't get security clearance in most cases, and there's some other little fiddly things, but that's basic. So we have these 2 visas. We have the H-1Bs and Ls, again, treated as one, H-1Bs, and EB visas. Here's the difference. H-1B visas are temporary. And worse, they are owned by the company. So Microsoft gets an H-1B visa. Microsoft then allows someone to use Microsoft's visa. But the visa at no point becomes the worker's visa. It's the property of the company. Which means the company can take it back anytime they want. If the company takes it back, you gotta go. Which means if the company comes to you and says, you know, we really need you to work on Saturdays from now on, and we need you to not work, we need you to work through Christmas, and we're going to cut your pay by 10%. Is that okay with you? The answer is yes, that's fine with me, because otherwise I have to leave the country. More on H-1Bs in a minute. We do not like H-1Bs. And our position in Washington, D.C., we are one of, if not the loudest critics of the H-1B in Washington, D.C. Over the last 2 years, the technology companies spent somewhere in the ballpark of $25 million trying to get more H-1B visas, and they didn't. We spent about $100,000 trying to stop them, and we did. Now, contrast that with the EB green card. When someone has a green card, they can behave like an American, which means if the boss comes to you and says, hey, need you to work Saturdays from now on, we need you to work through Christmas, and we're going to cut your salary by 10%, you say, okay, that's fine, and then you get your resume ready and find yourself a new job. Which means EB visa holders cannot be treated any differently than an American citizen. It costs the same, they get the same level of benefits, and they can quit if they don't get it. In other words, if a company has a choice between hiring an American citizen or an H-1B visa holder, there's a very good reason to pick the H-1B visa holder, even if the American is better qualified, which is you can use them. And by the way, that's entirely legal. If a company has a choice between an American citizen and a green card holder, there's no difference. It's the same thing. They cost the same, they have to be treated the same, so the best person gets the job. IEEE USA believes that there are very talented people in this world who are not born in the United States, And we believe it is in our interest if more of those very talented, innovative people were working in the United States. But you got to do it as a citizen. And that requires an EB green card, and that's why we support more EB green cards. Does that basic contrast make sense to everyone? Okay. A little bit more about the H-1B and the problems with it. I wish my laser point, oh, there it is, it's working. Said it makes H-1 international workers easy to exploit. It is not easily portable. Technically, H-1B visa holders can change jobs. If you find another company with an H-1B who will let you use it, you are legally allowed to switch, but it's difficult and risky. Because if your boss finds out you're looking, they can just pull the visa and you're done. So most H-1B visa holders are not able to change jobs. It is easy to use the visa to discriminate against American workers. In fact, that is the primary use of the H-1B. More than half of the H-1Bs last year were used by companies for the purpose of replacing American workers with lower cost foreign workers in the United States.
How's that spread by industry?
Sorry, who asked it?
Me.
Okay.
How's that spread by industry?
What do you mean spread? How's it done?
No, I mean, how does that spread across various industries that use H-1B visas?
Oh, that's a good question. And it's not uniform. There are lots of, for example, the power industry tends not to do that, although they're getting into outsourcing. So for example, Halliburton uses a lot of H-1Bs because they slosh their workforce around the world all the time and they have to move people in and move people out, so that's fine. The IT industry uses a ton of them. Software industry uses a ton of them. It is typically Indian engineers, Chinese as well, but typically Indian engineers, and Indian engineers are highly concentrated in the software fields. So that's where the H-1B abuse typically happens. Although over the last few years we've seen it start to spread out into other areas, but that's where it's focused. And we'll have a little more on that in a minute or two. There is gender discrimination problems in the H-1B. Somewhere around 85 to 90% of H-1B visa holders are men. Interestingly, 40% of engineering graduates in India are women, and yet none of them are hired for the H-1B. We're not sure why that is, but we believe the problem is women engineers are less likely to be willing to move anywhere on the planet anytime the company wants them to go, particularly if they're going to start a family. Women with families tend to like to stay put, and the whole point of the H-1B is the companies don't have to let you stay anywhere if they don't want to. And so it appears that the companies that use the H-1Bs heavily specifically don't hire women because they're harder to abuse. There's a growing backlog of people on H-1B. For many years, the H-1B was used as a holding pattern. You get your degree from an American university. Yay! You want to stay and become an American citizen. The company wants to hire you because they can't find an American to do a job. Great. They hire you, but you're a foreign student. Well, you need a visa to stay in the country. So the company applies for a green card for you. Awesome. Problem is it takes 10 years to get a green card. This is our number. So what are you going to do in those 10 years? Well, you get an H-1B. It's quick. You sit on an H-1B while the process goes forward. All well and good. The problem is we have more H-1Bs than green cards. Every year the line gets longer and longer and longer. No one knows exactly how many people are using an H-1B right now, which is interesting in and of itself. The government has no idea how many H-1Bs are being used. But it's somewhere around half a million. And it keeps getting longer and bigger every year. Lastly, H-1Bs encourage outsourcing. This is a list of the top 20 users of the H-1B visa in 2013. As you can see, it is not dominated by big technology companies. There are some over here. Microsoft, Qualcomm, Amazon, Intel, Google. But the top 11 companies are outsourcing companies, consulting companies, consulting companies, yeah. Infosys, Tata, Cognizant, Wipro, HCL, Mahindra, IBM India, iGate, Syntel, Emphasis, Capgemini is a little different, are pure outsourcing companies. I can send this data to anybody who wants it. By the way, this data comes from Computer World, which has all the numbers on who's using H-1B although not where the H-1Bs are being used. We'll get to that in a second. What these guys do is they get a lot of H-1Bs. They'll get 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 a year. They will then go to companies and say, Mr. CEO, your company makes lawnmowers. You're very good at making lawnmowers. You got a factory with plants and machines that make lawnmowers, and you know about lawnmowers, but you also have this IT department over here. And you got these guys working your email servers and working the systems that run your robots, and you don't really understand what they do, but you do know they're real expensive. Here's what you ought to do. Fire those guys. Hire us. We'll put really good engineers in those positions, and we'll charge you 20% less than what you're paying the Americans, and you don't have to worry about quitting, and you don't have to pay to give them benefits. Technically, you're supposed to give them benefits, but you don't have to give them as much as Americans. Sound like a good deal? It's an awesome deal. One of the best deals there is. For that reason, this industry, outsourcing, is, I believe, the most profitable part of the IT industry right now. Typical profit margins for these companies is between 20 and 26% a year, which Microsoft gets in the high single digits. So what we have here is a visa, and if you look at the numbers, Microsoft gets 1,000. Infosys got 6,000 visas last year, 6 times as many. And the primary use of those visas is to eliminate American jobs. I'll give you one quick example, and I'll give you another one in more detail in a minute. Cargill Corporation, big agricultural conglomerate up in the upper Midwest, announced earlier this year that they were laying off 900 Americans and replacing them with H-1B visa holders. And it was strictly a cost-saving matter. They just announced it. It was a press statement. Why? Because it made good financial sense and it boosted their stock price. And sometime by the end of this year, 900 Americans will no longer be employed. And 900 jobs in this country will never be done by an American again. If you make these guys use a green card, the whole business model falls apart. Because the business model is built on low wages. You have to be able to pay H-1B visa holders less than the prevailing American wage to make a profit. So if you give the H-1B visa holders the ability to quit and work for someone who will pay them the prevailing wage, business goes away and the jobs come back. Which is exactly what we're arguing to Congress. By the way, these 10 companies took 37% of all the visas used in 2013, just those 10 outsourcing companies. And if you add in iGate, Syntel, Emphasis, Capgemini, this is actually a financial consulting firm, and Oracle, you end up with 41% of all private sector visas were used by just those outsourcing companies last year. And there are a lot more outsourcing companies doing this. One interesting point, by the way, IBM India, I've distinguished between IBM and IBM India. IBM India is the part of IBM that does business in India. Not surprisingly, they got 4 times more H-1B visas than IBM did. Now, wait a minute. Why would the part of IBM that does business in India be getting 4 times more visas in the United States than the part of IBM that does business in the United States? The answer is, this is how IBM trains its Indian workforce. They hire Indian engineers, they bring them to the United States for 2 to 3 years to teach them how IBM does business, but also how to do business with Americans, and then send them home again. And that's how they train their workforce. IBM now employs many multiples more people in India than they do in the United States. It's basically an Indian consulting company now, with some executives in the United States. All of this is entirely legal, it is entirely above board, and it is entirely out in the open if anybody cares to look at it. So what's going on in Florida? These are the largest recipients of H-1B approvals in India, in Florida, in 2012. Now, I want to be clear what I'm showing you here. The previous slide showed actual visas that were used. Those represent bodies. Infosys got 6,000 bodies hired in 2013. These are approvals. You get approved to use an H-1B, then you actually have to get a visa. And there aren't that many available, so less than half of these visas were actually used. The problem is we can't sort the actual visas by geographic location. So I can tell you how many visas Infosys got, but I can't tell you where they were used. But I can tell you where they applied to use them, which is what this is. And what we see is Syntel, Wipro, Cognizant, Patentee Americas, which did not make the top 20, but which is in the top 30. Infosys, Tata Consultancy. If we look at just the major outsourcing companies, 48% of all approved visas in Florida went to pure outsourcing companies. Syntel, by the way, is an interesting story. Syntel employed 2,100 people in 2000, and I think it was 11, 2,100 people in the United States, all Indian programmers. They have a couple salespeople, a couple lawyers that are American. But basically, the entire workforce of all of these companies are foreign nationals in the United States by policy. Their business model is not to hire Americans. Syntel applied last year for 57,000 H-1B visas. They employed 2,100 people. They need 57,000 of the visas. What? Well, here's Syntel's business model. They apply for just gobs of visas. They see how many they get. They rent those people out for a profit. And they don't care how many they get because they'll be able to rent them all out because they're so cheap. It's an interesting process. By the way, 48% is actually low. Typically, the bigger states, California, Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, the percentages are around 50%, a little below 50%. Most of the smaller states, it's a lot higher than that. Wisconsin, it's 80% of all approved visas went to outsourcing companies. Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, all of them. Oklahoma's at 83%. A lot of the smaller states, it's just ridiculous. And the difference is, Florida has a lot of legitimate technology companies. Arkansas doesn't. So all of the H-1Bs are being used in IT capacity at other types of companies.
Making it different that we have military industrial type engineering that then they can't get clearance.
That is actually a very interesting issue because yes, H-1B workers can't get clearance because they're not Americans. And so there are jobs that cannot be done by H-1Bs. The problem is they are being done by H-1Bs. There have been, last year there were 3 well-publicized instances where H-1B workers were in sensitive positions, either with our government or kind of next to our government, in which they were caught walking sensitive material out of the country. In one case, there was a Chinese engineer working for NASA, doesn't require security clearance, who took a flash drive from his pocket, actually I think it was a her, and was getting on a plane in Los Angeles to go back to China with it in her pocket. There was another guy who worked for a defense contractor. He didn't work in the defense side of things, but he worked right next to a guy that worked in the defense side of it. I mean, literally they shared an office. And apparently for years, this guy took a 2-week vacation every summer to go visit family in Chicago, when actually he was going back to China and briefing the Chinese military on what the technology was coming to do. Lastly, there was an instance, there was actually a medical researcher at a pharmaceutical company that stole cancer drugs. He stole the formula or whatever it is for a cancer drug, flew back to China, and the Chinese company was produced it like that. Here's the thing to note about these folks. The United States makes a deal with our immigrants. The deal is, you want to come to our country, you want to be an American, fine. You can come, but you have to swear allegiance to our country. And our country comes first, and you owe first loyalty to our country. You can celebrate St. Patrick's Day, you can celebrate Cinco de Mayo, that's all great, but you owe your first loyalty to us. And in return, you get to be us. Not in name, not just kind of technically American, you get to be real Americans. And it's a hell of a good deal for everybody involved, and it's worked really well for this country for the last 200 years. The problem is, we didn't make that deal with these guys. They're foreign nationals. They haven't been promised anything by this country. They are Chinese, Indian, Malaysian, Filipino, Colombian, whatever citizens who owe their loyalty to their country. And since we haven't promised them anything, I don't think we can expect much from them either. In the green card, the whole calculation changes. You want a green card, you owe us your loyalty. But we didn't do that with these guys. I want to dwell on this for just 1 second. I had the great honor of speaking at Los Alamos National Laboratory several years ago, the IEEE section. And this was around the time, I don't know if you remember it, there was a Chinese-American researcher that was accused of stealing laptops and hard drives. Turns out he did. That's a whole other story. The lab was getting beaten up in the press because of security lapses. And so at this exact time, I was out there talking to some of our members in the labs, and they were saying, this is, let me show you, guys, let me show you something. Took me outside the lab, he said, you see that fence over there? That's the edge of the lab. You see the building right on the other side of that? That's a Korean engineering company that is consulting with the lab. That building is a Chinese engineering company. That one is a French engineering company. We have nationals, foreign nationals, in our lab every day working on our projects. He said, I didn't bring these people in. I didn't say this was a good idea. The higher-ups who are now blaming the engineers for losing sensitive material thought it was a good idea to have half our lab run by foreign nationals. Doesn't make much sense. They're still doing it, by the way. So you would think that requiring a security clearance would help, but it actually doesn't.
All right, no idea what I was going to ask. Something about LEB visa. All right, keep going. Back there.
Okay, I'm going to assume you were going to ask me about Nielsen ratings. Yes.
You mentioned earlier that the H1 are good for a temporary or some limited amount of time. Is there a defined amount of time, or is it?
There is. H1B visas are good for 3 years, but can automatically be renewed for another 3 years, so you get 6 years.
Okay.
But if your company has applied for a green card for you, if you're not an H1B, and the company has sponsored you for a green card, you can stay as long as you want until that application has been adjudicated. So you can stay for 5 years, then be sponsored for a green card, and spend 10 years waiting for that green card to be processed, putting you on an H1B for 16 years.
So that's how the list just gets longer and longer.
Oh, yes.
Now I remember. So if you go for an EB visa, do you have to pledge loyalty to anybody? I mean, it's just so there is a pledge.
It's a green card.
The green card. So effectively, you're signing up and saying, "Hey, I'm all that sort of stuff." Like that.
Yeah, I mean, the principle behind a green card is when you get a green card, you're in theory supposed to be getting ready to become an American citizen.
Okay.
It's like the minor leagues for American citizens. Now, you don't have to become a citizen. You're not required, but that's the assumption is that you're not an American citizen. You're still a French or German or Russian or Chinese national, but you're in line, and so you're supposed to be. Yeah, you're on our team. You're just not in the majors yet. So, I want to spend a minute telling you a story about Nielsen ratings. And some of you know this story. I'm going to tell it anyway because I tell this to every member of Congress because it's a great story. Nielsen ratings, the television guys. How many of you know the story that I'm about to tell, by the way? I knew you do. You know the story. Oh, you guys need to know this. So, Nielsen ratings, the television ratings guys, you know who they are. They were given a grant by, I think it was the Florida government. I don't think it was Tampa government. I think it was Florida. Gave them a tax break to open a facility just north of here, just outside of Tampa. They built a facility. They hired like 210 people to do whatever it is Nielsen does. Some computer people, some mathematics people, some data people to run the numbers. Oh, all was good. Lots of good jobs. Everybody's happy. After about 3 years, all of them were fired, except a couple of them. Nielsen contracted with Tata Consulting. Tata Consulting hired a bunch of H1B workers, put them at the same facility, at the same desks, doing the same job, for about 25% less money. Some of the Americans were kept on staff for about a year, a little less than a year, to train the new H1B workers on how to do what it is that Nielsen does. After that year, all the Americans were fired, the facility was shut down, and the whole thing was moved to India, where it still resides. That's what the H1B visa does. It allows companies to train their overseas workers on how to do business with the United States. And it allows them to fire Americans and replace them with H1B, with their foreign workers in the United States. And your Florida tax dollars help them do it. Okay. This was back in 2008. And every one of your members of Congress knows that, because I've told every single one.
How is it received by them when you tell them that?
You don't believe me? And this happens all the time. But the difference with Nielsen is your local paper. Tampa Tribune, thank you, did a series of very detailed articles about what was going on and documented everything. So we have a nice source that isn't me saying it, that's a neutral source saying this is what happened, this is where they went. Nielsen has also bragged over the years in The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, and a few other publications about how much money they save by doing this. The thing is, like I said, the tech companies are spent $25 million in the last 2 years trying to convince Congress that H-1Bs are awesome. And they have a horde of lobbyists, many of whom I know, many of whom are quite nice, who spend their time on Capitol Hill explaining to your congressman how if you want to get smart people, you want smart people to work here, right? You want smart people in Tampa. Well, Florida has some really, really good universities that has a lot of people that were not born in this country getting really, really useful degrees. You want them working here, right? Here's how you get them to work here. You give them an H-1B visa. Give me an H-1B visa. I'll hire them to work in Tampa. Everybody wins, right? This is how we're going to do high-scale immigration. We're going to do it with an H-1B visa. So if you ask most people in Washington what a high-skill visa is, they say it's an H-1B. And you say, well, what does an H-1B do? And they'll say it allows smart people to immigrate into the United States. And that's just wrong, but it's been repeated so many times that everybody they just know it. And it takes, and once somebody knows something, it takes a lot of effort to change their mind. Just tough. All right. A little bit on the politics of immigration. As most of you probably know, the Senate passed a comprehensive immigration reform bill in 2013, last July to be exact, passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. In there, this was the amnesty bill. This is the amnesty bill that gets all the attention. Again, we have no position on amnesty, but I'm sure most of you do, which is fine. The comprehensive bill increased the H-1B cap from roughly, the cap right now is 85,000, but because there are exemptions and things, it ends up being about 125, 135, 150,000 H-1Bs issued every year. It will bump that up to 250,000. But that's bad. But it included some really useful protections. For example, a rule saying you cannot use the H-1B to outsource American jobs. Which, you know, I think that's a fairly reasonable thing to do. You cannot use a visa program to cause Americans to be fired. Also had limits saying only 50% of a company's workforce could be on an H-1B. Had new rules for calculating what wages H-1Bs had to be paid. Not perfect, but certainly better than the current situation. So we have, on the one hand, we have more of them, which is bad. But on the other hand, there's more restrictions on how to use them, which is good. Probably a net loss to the engineering community, but not a bad one. But we also had a rule that said every international student in the United States who earns a master's or a PhD in a STEM field from an American university gets a green card. So every international student in this country will be able to go from student visa to green card without having to go through the H-1B program at all. Now, this will increase immigration in this country a little bit. But the reality is most of those folks can stay anyway. They just have to hang out on the H-1B for a decade before they get citizenship. So let's just skip that. Go right to the citizenship stage. Cool. Something I forgot to mention, H-1B visa holders cannot start companies. They cannot start their own business. They're the most entrepreneurial people on the planet. And our laws say, no, you can't start a business. So, IEEE endorsed this. We did it very tepidly. We did it acknowledging that there were severe problems with it. We did endorse the bill. The House Committee passed 4 little immigration bills, one of which was a high-skill bill. It increased the number of H-1Bs to roughly the same as the Senate, but had no worker protection and had a smaller green card exception. We did not endorse that because of the lack of worker protections. After the Senate passed their bill and the House Committee passed their bills, as I think you all are aware, nothing happened for a year. And it's unlikely that anything is going to happen for at least a few more months until we get a new Congress. So that is basically where we stand politically.
Russell, real quick question. So why did nothing happen? Because if I recall my Saturday morning cartoon song, after a bill gets passed in the Senate and a different one gets passed in the House, a committee is formed as a committee.
It's called a conference committee.
irons out the differences between the two bills and then they get resubmitted. Where did that train go off?
The House didn't pass the bill. The House Judiciary Committee passed the bill.
Okay, so committee that said.
And then it has to go to the floor of the House, which never happened.
And then it died.
And that's what we have. And the reason it didn't pass is because because of the low skill stuff, the Congress could not decide how to deal with low skill immigration. There was general consensus that people that had come here illegally needed to be given some sort of legal status. The question was how, when could they then become citizens, if ever? And more importantly, how do we make sure that another 10 million people don't come over the border in the next 5 years? And they never could work that out. Plus, just no one out there likes each other. So they can't work with each other anymore. And this particular issue, and especially, the relationships that needed to be there to get something done just fell apart. Yes, ma'am.
Are you tracking the numbers in the graduate programs to see if they're being more?
Good question. We were asked by Chuck Rassel, who is the senior senator from Iowa, and next year he will likely be chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and therefore the most important person in the Senate on immigration issues, and he hates H-1B visas. It's awesome. Chuck Rassel, commercial guy, he's awesome. He raised that exact issue because we tried to convince him that green cards were a better option, and he said, okay, look back over the last 20 years and show me the percentage of American students that get accepted in engineering schools. Because I want to make sure that the percentage that are being accepted doesn't fall, showing that Americans are being crowded out of our universities. And we look back to the early 80s, which is the farthest back we get the data, and we found that the percentage of Americans being accepted into engineering programs has been basically flat up till we did this study in 2011. When the economy is really good, acceptance rates go up because fewer people apply, and when the economy is bad, acceptance rates fall because more people apply, but it's been basically flat. And so what this tells us is roughly the same percentage of Americans who want to get into engineering schools are getting into engineering schools. However, there are more engineering school seats now than there were in the 80s. And so a greater percentage of those seats are being taken up with foreign students because there are more foreign students interested in engineering than there are American students interested in engineering. That's a problem, but it's a different problem. Did that answer your question? It's a complicated one. It's hard to track, but it's important. Where am I? Oh, yeah. And then, do you guys all know who Eric Cantor is?
No.
No? Okay. Eric Cantor is the Republican majority leader. So in the House of Representatives, you have Speaker Boehner from Ohio, Republican. He runs the place. Under him is the majority leader, who is Eric Cantor. He's from Virginia. He happens to represent the congressional district right next to mine. So I know him and I know his district pretty well. He had a primary this year. And for the first time in American history, a sitting majority leader in the House of Representatives lost his primary. I believe it was June 4th. Now, what's interesting about that is that I was actually in a briefing given by the White House, the executive office building right next to the White House, on the afternoon of June 4th, as the primary was happening. And what we were told is the White House plan for getting immigration reform passed was, once Eric Cantor wins his primary, he will then be able to make a compromise with us, and then we'll get this done. And Eric Cantor lost his primary. And now the White House plan is part of that debate, part of the reason Eric Cantor lost, there's a lot of reasons Eric Cantor lost. Maybe he did a lot of things wrong. I can go into detail if you're interested, but I'm betting you're not quite as deep about these things as I am, so I'll just get into the details. His opponent actually ran against the H-1B visa. I think it's the first time a candidate has explicitly made that part of a campaign pitch. And he said Eric Cantor supports outsourcing because he supports H-1B visas. And it resonated with me. Made sure everybody out there knows it. When Eric Cantor lost, in part because he supported comprehensive immigration reform, most of the House representatives said, maybe that's not a priority anymore. So now we're not going to do it. A number of senators said the same thing.
So then we're in a situation where the White House is now saying they're going to do something on immigration. The reality is a number of, almost every law passed over the last 20 years has been vague and tends to be aspirational. Congress got lazy. And so they pass a law saying the president shall instruct the Secretary of the Interior to make all of our parks beautiful. Yay, we made our parks beautiful. Look at that, we passed a bill that made the parks beautiful. Well, that gives the Secretary of the Interior massive amounts of discretion on how to do that. Immigration is the same way, as is, by the way, healthcare and Social Security and all the other big programs. And so the president is now debating what he can do without Congress to reform our immigration system. He is promising certain Hispanic groups that he will do something to legalize large numbers of undocumented workers. There's two problems with that. First of all, he can't do that. He can say, for the duration of my term in office, I won't prosecute anybody for violating the terms of their visas or being here. He can do that. But that's not a permanent status. That's just a temporary reprieve. The other problem is if he does that, the Republicans are going to go nuts in the House of Representatives. And it will probably cost the Democrats a couple of sentences in places like Arkansas, Louisiana, North Carolina, where they need to maintain seats. And so I'm not sure he's going to do that, although he's been promising people to do it. So